Good evening, everyone. Meteorologist Sven Sungard here, updating you on the severe weather situation this evening as we take a look at what's happening around the region. The atmosphere is definitely ripe, lots of humidity and some dynamics to deal with in the Well, good evening, everybody. As mentioned, the atmosphere is ripe and finally storms are popping. Took a little longer than normally is the case because the cap in the atmosphere, it's just very hot. And because temperatures actually didn't get as warm as they could have today, that cap was a little bit stronger. But we do have a forcing mechanism going through the atmosphere, touching off those storms, finally getting things going as expected. But this is going to be a mainly late evening and overnight scenario. And literally just in the last 20-30 minutes, these storms have popped. They're all northeast of the metro right now, and finally getting some lightning and thunder. So literally from a cloud to a thunderstorm, full blown in about 20 minutes. So the situation is pretty volatile. We have a mixture of lots of juice, and when I say juice, I do mean humidity and of course heat, plenty of that. But also we have the dynamics in the atmosphere that help these storms organize, and so that they don't just pop up, pour on themselves, and then die away. So it's very important that we have that. And we're watching some pretty strong cells here moving right through Webster, through Spooner, and Shell Lake, Wisconsin. Those are two very strong cells right now, and then further east, southeast towards Birchwood and Edgewater, all in northwestern Wisconsin right now. So those storms are tracking south-southeast for now, but what often happens with these storms is as they start to really organize themselves and produce some wind, they turn into what we call right turners, which means in this case, if the cells are moving southeast, they're going to start to move straight south. And that's when they'll start to organize into a bow echo or a derecho. I know many of you were commenting today that you were hearing about that because the Weather Service was talking about that potential and the Storm Prediction Center, and that is a distinct possibility because initially we're going to see these cells start out as supercells, which are dangerous storms in themselves and the best chance of seeing tornadoes. So the first hour or two in these storms development is when we're looking at that potential for tornadic activity. But then as they start to produce wind, kind of come together and merge into one blob and form a line, we're going to start to see them potentially produce that bow echo or the straight line winds at derecho. And that of course is dangerous in itself because the damage becomes more widespread. We're talking about more people affected as these move across northwestern Wisconsin. So one of the things that we're watching right now is the atmosphere really bubbling up. You can see on the visible satellite imagery here, this is literally just in the last 30 minutes. As I mentioned, we're seeing those storms really start to bubble up here in the east central part of Minnesota and also northwestern Wisconsin. You can see it just looks like an atomic bomb going off essentially. And those are those storms that really have just popped up. And the forcing mechanism for these storms I put on here in this sort of peach colored contours to the west. This is a wave moving through the atmosphere that is giving that just enough buoyancy to get those storms to go through the cap. So these storms, the clouds we saw all day trying to fill in, but the air couldn't rise through that cap. So you need a couple other things to help push the air upward through the cap, and that's coming in the form of what we call this short wave, or this just little bend in the upper level atmosphere. It acts like sort of an upper level cool front if you go up 10,000 feet or so, and that's just enough to help spawn some of these storms to get through that cap. And also a jet streak, we call this. So an increase in winds aloft moving into northern and central Minnesota right now that helps to suck air upward. Literally, you can imagine if something moves very quickly above you, the air is going to come in from beneath, and that all those things combined are helping those storms produce right now across the area. So we do not have any warnings at the moment, I believe, but we do have a tornado watch that was just issued from the Storm Prediction Center and the Weather Service, outlined here in blue, and it does include the eastern, northeastern metro, so Ramsey, Anoka, Washington counties, Chisago counties. You guys are on the western, southwestern edge of this watch. So probably going to avoid most of the thunderstorm activity for the metro, but some of the northeastern suburbs and the far eastern suburbs along the St. Croix River could be clipped by some of these storms, especially, again, as I mentioned, if they start to make that right turn and dive straight south instead of southeast, which is what they're all moving right now. And of course, it does include pretty much the entire state of Wisconsin because we are expecting these storms to organize into what we call a derecho, and those are long-lived. They can go across an entire state all night long. We saw a severe form of one of these, of course, last year across the state of Iowa. That was a very bad scenario, just an extreme scenario of what these derechos can do. So I'm going to show you what's going on with the models here, showing that development. So models are doing pretty well. Our short-term model, this is the Hrr model. It updates once an hour, so it's a rapid update model and takes in new data all the time. So in theory, the most accurate and a higher resolution, so it can handle some things like thunderstorm development. So it's got this pretty much pegged. This is 8 o'clock, that line of storms developing, tracking east, southeast, but then watch what happens. You see that cluster come together, and that's when we start to see this is 10 o'clock. Again, maybe clipping some of the eastern suburbs, but really moving through western and central Wisconsin, and then producing some pretty high wind gusts as they go along. So I know in the metro, a lot of you were hoping for some rainfall. I think that most of us get really missed by this, and in fact, if you're in the eastern suburbs, even there, getting clipped by these will not be enough to do a whole lot as far as rainfall. And of course, rain is one thing, we want that, but of course we do not want the severe weather. I'm going to put on the wind gust swaths on here because the models, this model does pretty well at actually showing you the general area of where those highest wind gusts potentially could be. And I want to show you how they start to produce winds pretty quickly. This is between 8 and 9 o'clock. So within the next hour, these winds could start to produce those high wind gusts. And in fact, we have our first warning here in northwestern Wisconsin. So we'll go to that quickly and show you what's happening there. So if you're in the Spooner Shell Lake area towards Birchwood, Wisconsin, you are under severe thunderstorm warning. This is not a tornado warning, but again, we are watching these cells initially as they start to organize and rotate, that they have that potential to produce some tornadoes. The dynamics are there in the atmosphere for that. But right now, we're looking at mostly large hail and potential for some high wind gusts. These storms are going to be pretty quickly attempting to produce some high winds over 60 miles per hour. So again, that's our first warning of the evening for that cell that's in the middle of that line. The activity that's further to the west towards Pine City, moving towards Grantsburg, Wisconsin, not severe at the moment, but it's very possible that a warning could be issued for that area as well. So I'm going to go back to showing you where these wind gusts are possibly going to be moving through those wind swaths. And this shows you through the evening where the best chance of seeing some of those winds are. And you can see that really it is a western Wisconsin event, but maybe even just east of the St. Croix River, seeing some of those high wind gusts. And for reference, those orange, reds, and browns and whites, those are 60 to 80 mile per hour wind gusts. So they are highlighted there pretty well. So it is that western Wisconsin area that we're really watching for those high wind gusts, and then a derecho as they move further to the south and east. And again, the potential also for some of that severe weather too. I want to show you some of the severe weather parameters just to show you what we're looking at as far as where the dynamics all come together. So it's one thing, we all have the heat and humidity, and you might be wondering, well, why doesn't western Minnesota, where it was hotter today, it was 102, in fact, in Canby and Madison, Minnesota, but they're not seeing thunderstorm development there, because you need the ingredients, the juice, but you also need something to shake the juice up, and that's the dynamics, whether it's a jet stream, whether it's vorticity or spin in the middle of the atmosphere, one of these short waves that we were just talking about, or enough instability, which means essentially cooler air aloft so that the air can rise. If it's too warm in the middle of the atmosphere, it's very difficult to get the air to penetrate through that and produce storms. And further west, including over the metro, we are pretty well capped, and it's just that cap is just weak enough to our northeast where those dynamics are coming together to allow storms to develop. So this is showing what we call the Supercell Index. It is highest over the Twin Cities, you can see, and into western Wisconsin. So these storms are really going to be riding sort of the eastern edge or gradient of some of the highest parameters. So that's the Supercell Index. One thing we look at is CAPE, convective available potential energy. This essentially combines temperature and humidity along with the instability aloft. How much cool air is there aloft to create instability? Again, you see 6,000 joules is how we measure this of direct energy over central Minnesota. That's a lot. It's off the charts, but these are developing along that eastern gradient. You can see kind of from Mille Lacs Lake into northwestern Wisconsin. We expect that to be the case with pretty much all of these things, really just off to our north and northeast. And the other thing that's going on here is we do have a front pushing through. Notice the wind shift. I put on what we call the streamlines. Essentially, where does the wind blow? It is strong out of the south, right here over the Twin Cities into western Wisconsin, but off just to the north and northwest. That's where the wind is shifting out of the northwest. So we have a frontal boundary, a ton of humidity too. I was just checking this before we came on. Our dew point has jumped in the Twin Cities to the highest level we've seen this summer. So these 70s dew points are across Minnesota, but if we look at the current airport observation, we are 90 degrees right now with a 79 degree dew point. If you calculate that out here, I've done that. You can see the bottom number is the heat index. 106 is what it feels like. So I know a lot of people today are like, are we going to get those triple digit heat indices? It sure seems like it's going to be hard to do. Well, here we did it. We verified it. The Weather Service verified their excessive heat warning. Highest heat index that I've seen so far this summer. I think it probably is. The other thing that we're looking at is the tornado parameters too. So we have different indices that use all these specific dynamics in the atmosphere to calculate specific things. And I'm not sure that it's on here, but I'm going to back up to the Storm Prediction Center site and show you what they're showing. And so again, that Supercell Index very high from the metro into northwestern Wisconsin. But as we look at the significant tornado index, the effective layer, which is a long story, but basically from the metro into western Wisconsin. And again, like I was saying, these cells are going to ride the edge of that activity. So it's the western edge of these storms that could be some of the worst here as we head into the evening hours. So back to the radar, we have a new warning issue further east towards Ladysmith, Wisconsin, Murray, Ladysmith, Detoni, Conrath, Sheldon, if you're in those areas, under severe thunderstorm warning as well right now. So again, these storms filling in. I wouldn't be shocked if this cell here that's moving right, just clipping Pine City to the north, has a warning shortly, especially as it crosses the St. Croix into northwestern Wisconsin. Again, this is all rapidly developing. Literally 30, 40 minutes ago, there was almost nothing on radar, but we are starting to see the clouds bubble up. So that's something that we've been seeing. And I want to go back to the tornado watch here and show you what's happening, where the outline of, or I'm sorry, the severe thunderstorm watch. This is not a tornado watch, but a severe thunderstorm watch. But we are looking for that potential these first couple of hours through, say, 9 or so, that these initial storms could spin up into potential tornado producers before they produce that bow echo or that derecho of high wind events. So again, most of the state of Wisconsin under that severe thunderstorm watch, but also the east central portions of Minnesota, including really just the very far eastern fringes of the metro. Doesn't even show up here because we still have that excessive heat warning, but I can tell you that Anoka, Washington, and Ramsey counties are in that severe thunderstorm watch, but Hennepin County we're not. So that shows you that really the metro is on the farthest western edge, even though it's hot, even though it's humid. Highest humidity we've seen so far this year. We don't have the dynamics, and the cap is just too strong here. So all of this is happening on the edge of the cap, and all the worst conditions are going to happen where those highest parameters, that Supercell Index, the Cape, the significant tornado index, all line up with the edge of the cap, and that's exactly what we're seeing right now. So back to the radar, just want to show you again those warnings. We're going to make this a quick update and potentially come on later as things progress, but these things are going to move pretty quickly into western Wisconsin here through the evening hours. But again, 2 severe thunderstorm warnings still that we're watching towards Shell Lake, Spooner, Madge, Edgewater, Birchwood, and then towards Ladysmith, Wisconsin. That's where we're seeing things right now. I'm going to try to put on the storm tracks for you and see if those are doing pretty well this evening, just to give you a little bit of an idea of some of the places that we're looking at here. So yeah, Shell Lake really within the next 7 to 8 minutes, and then moving towards Birchwood here, that second cell coming in from the northwest by about 8 o'clock or just after, so the next 15 to 20 minutes. And right now the radar indications are up to 1-inch size hail, which is the minimum criteria for a severe hail size. But these cells are also moving pretty quickly. 42 knots you can see in that box in the upper left. And the quicker the cells are moving, the potential they have to produce high wind gusts quickly too. So one of the things that we watch for in these severe weather situations is something called Downdraft Cape. You've maybe heard of a downdraft before in a severe thunderstorm. And I'll put that on here quick, and you can see in the upper left of your screen, Downdraft Cape is high. Anything that's in that brown, dark red or dark brown from the Twin Cities into western Wisconsin, that's some very high Downdraft Cape. Basically, this measures the reverse of thunderstorm energy that bubbles up, Cape as we're talking about, but the reverse of that. What's the energy potential for something, a parcel that falls downward? So we want to see how fast would that air fall based on dry air in the middle of the atmosphere and some other things. And that's all pretty high. So we do expect these cells to produce some high wind gusts. That cell a little further east right now, just east of Birchwood, that one is moving, again, also 49 knots. That's pretty high. So already the storms themselves are moving about 60 miles an hour. So they could no problem produce some 60-mile-an-hour wind gusts. So be aware of that potential. Moving right through these areas, Murray, Glenfora, some pretty rural areas, of course, in northwestern Wisconsin here over the next 20 minutes or so. And then that storm that's not severe, but kind of right on top of Pine City right now. 1-inch hail there potentially as well, not moving as quickly, 33 knots, but crossing over, it looks like the St. Croix River here by about in the next 6-7 minutes and moving towards Grantsburg, Trade Lake, Frederick, Wisconsin, Clam Falls, and then eventually towards maybe Cumberland here in an hour. So if you're in the Cumberland, Wisconsin area, you're getting missed by these storms to the northwest, but that cell off to the west, this cell towards Pine City, could be moving towards you in about an hour or so. I'm going to take off the storm tracks for a second because it gets a little busy on here and loop this again. So, and then again, they just extended that severe thunderstorm warning for the cell that they first warned on here for the Spooner Shell Lake areas. That's now extended into Rice Lake as these cells continue their trajectory off to the southeast. So I mentioned this earlier. These are all moving southeast right now, anywhere from about 40 miles an hour to 60 miles an hour with high wind gust potential. But I also mentioned that as these cells get organized and start to produce those wind gusts, they can do what we call right turns. And then they start to dive pretty much straight south. So what happens is as they really pick up speed, they can move pretty much straight south. We call these right turning supercells. So that's how you look at that activity up around Pine City and you wonder, well, how could that clip the East Metro? Well, if it starts to really develop more and then move straight south, it could kind of ride the St. Croix River. It's not doing that though at this time, but that's the situation right now. So I wanted to update you all as the storms are really getting going right now, and we may have further updates as things develop, but things developing pretty quickly, mainly for Wisconsin and just that far east central edge of Minnesota at the moment.